Today I want to tell you why it's better to have a couple of cheap cameras than one expensive camera. Pretty sure we've all been there where we're starting out in photography and you go on the forums and you ask advice, what camera should I buy? And all you hear is buy the best that you can afford. Spend every last cent you got for the best image quality you can get. Now 15 years ago I would have agreed with that because cameras were making progress in leaps and bounds. But today I'd say don't listen to that advice. If you want to go into, let's say you want to do a bit of wedding photography, of course you don't just start out doing it straight away on your own. You second shoot with someone or you do it cheap for someone who can't afford a photographer otherwise. But if you've got one really good camera, you're going to get decent images, but what happens if that camera fails? What if you're doing video? You know, it's no good. Have you ever seen those videos, wedding videos, where you got this guy with a camcorder and he's following them everywhere from a distance and you just see them in the background there and you think, I'd like to see them a bit closer. Well, I'm just going to show you one of the weddings I did where I used a couple of cheap cameras. This is the view you often get when someone's videoing a wedding, even if it's a really good camera. This view from a distance, and if you've only got the one camera, well, you're going to have that all the time. This is what I did at a wedding. Now, I'm not a professional wedding videographer. What I did is I went on the wedding discussion forums and I said, look, I've photographed weddings before. I'd like to try wedding videography and I will charge $500 for a full day wedding video. You take what you get. And I had 3 hits in a month and I did these 3 weddings. I learned a lot from it. But I had a couple of cheap cameras. Now, I had bought a GH5 because they were the best at the time, but that was only because we had just sold our house and I had a bit of spare money left over. So my first brand new camera in years was a GH5 and they're very well known for videography. But I also had a cheap GH4. Now, I had a video 2 weeks ago on how to get camera gear for free, where you buy a kit with a bit of stuff and you sell off the bits and you end up with something very cheap or free at the end of it. I bought this GH4 body, this one here. I bought this with the newer 14 to 140mm lens, this is the older one, and a camera cage. That all was $400 New Zealand dollars, which is about 290 American dollars. Today I sold the one lens for $450. So I've got my money back, including the shipping for about $30. This hasn't sold yet. There's one person watching the auction, may or may not sell, but that lens has already paid for everything I bought. So I've got one free GH4 body. Even if you go out and pay $200 for this, or 2 or 3 of them, you're doing well. So today you go out and a GH6 is, let's have a look. You want to buy a GH6 and we have 2,900 New Zealand dollars as a kit, which is probably about 2,000 American dollars. You think, do I need just this one camera? I'm going to film this wedding or whatever. I'm going to be at the same angle all the time. If I trip and fall and damage that camera, it's all over. So why not have more than one camera? We have a look at the GH5 now. 1,798 New Zealand dollars. So you can save $1,000 by buying the GH5 instead of the GH6. And then the G7 is $995 with 2 lenses. So 2 cameras for the price of a GH6. But do you even need to get brand new cameras like that? Go and find a second-hand GH5. They're $1,700 for the body now. You can pick them up about $900 New Zealand for a GH5. The GH4, like I said, I've got 3 of them that were actually free from buying kits and selling the stuff off. And you can buy one for about $400 for a GH4 body. So there's $900 for a GH5 second hand. Let's say another $800 for 2 GH4 bodies plus lenses and stuff. There's $1,700 as opposed to nearly $3,000 just for one of the latest cameras. And you can put them in different places. This wedding that I did, I had my GH5 as my main camera, and got some of the footage here from where I was standing with that camera. Then I had the GH4. You can see the angle it's sitting at here. It was pointing. I knew the bride was going to walk down this way. And as she walked away, I just pivoted the tripod away so that it followed her, and I left that there. Then I had this GoPro up on the platform. I mean, can you tell that's the GoPro image? It's wide angle, but is it bad quality? You can see me there on the left with my GH5. You can see the GH4 right at the back there, just sitting on a box there. And this is the classic image you see of someone standing at the distance filming everything with a camcorder. But we had these different cameras at different angles. Now, what looks more professional? One expensive camera from a distance, or a couple of cheaper cameras from different angles? There's the angle with my GH5, and then from that point they walk off. Now, look at that angle. That's not the best quality, but it's this $30 SJ cam. I mean, a wedding videographer wouldn't even dream of using a camera like this, but it gave me a different angle for a few seconds. Do you think they really care that it was a cheap camera? They got a different angle. It looks better than this view from a distance all the time. There I have them walking away again, and as they turn their back to the camera, we jump to the GH4 that was sitting there all this time watching them. So that's my advice for this week, is that you better to have a couple of cheap cameras, because today's cameras, even if they're 10 years old, are more than good enough quality. When the GH4 came out, it was the camera of the day. If you wanted to be a wedding videographer, you had to have a GH4. Now no one wants them because there's a GH5 and a GH6 out. Do you think the customers will notice a difference? And you're not cheating your customers by using these old cameras. You give them a better deal because you can have a couple of cameras and different angles, which makes things look that much more professional than the latest, best camera on earth from one view all the time. Now, having said that, some of the beginners are still saying, everyone on the forum just saying that the latest camera has got more bits and dynamic range and better low ISO performance and higher ISO performance, and they carry on and they'll mumble and mutter and say, no, you just must get this latest camera. In 2 years' time, they're going to be telling you to get another camera because this latest camera just doesn't have it. And you know what? I bet you most of them can't even get the best images out of a 10-year-old camera. But they listen to all their mates on the forums and they're convinced you must have the latest and greatest, most expensive camera. Just as an example, most of my favorite photos were taken on a 6 megapixel Nikon D40 because I always had it in the car with me on the seat next to me because I didn't care too much what happened to it. Even when I was doing a photo shoot in the water, I thought, I don't want my D90 at the time to fall into the water. I'll take my cheap D40 and take some pictures there. I had a 18-200 zoom lens. I was taking some photos close in of this mirror shot that I wanted to do, and then just to show what the scene looked like, I zoomed back, took a picture, and got one of my favorite pictures. And no one ever questioned whether it was taken with a prime lens or a full frame camera. They just said, wow, that's a nice image. And then I tell them it was a Nikon D40. And I've got a friend who had a Nikon D4 and a Nikon D40. And he told me it took a few years for him to realize that no one could tell the difference which camera he used. We had a guy on the One Photography forum who had the Nikon 58mm f1.4 lens. And he raved on and on about how amazing this lens was, and he only shot with that lens. And after a year or so, he popped up some photos, and they were taken with his 24 to 85mm kit lens. Everyone said to him, what happened to your 58mm 1.4? And he said, I sent it in for a service, and I used this lens in the meantime, and I realized I couldn't see a difference in the photos. If you're shooting in decent light and you don't need f1.4, nobody can look at your image without using a microscope and say that wasn't taken with a prime lens. And 99% of the time you'd have to have the two images side by side, zoomed into 100% to see a difference. So why does it matter? Your customers aren't going to zoom into 100%. I mentioned my D90 earlier. That's an older 12 megapixel camera, probably 15 years old now. I got published by National Geographic with one of my high-speed photos on that. They never said, oh, is this the latest and greatest camera, or is this a prime lens? And they just said, we want to pay you to print this image in our book. Why do you have to have the latest and greatest? There's some cases where you're better off with something newer, could do better in low light for specialised work. Most of the weddings I've ever photographed in New Zealand have been outdoor weddings. You go indoors, you can still get pretty decent images with a prime lens. You throw in a cheap prime lens on your camera and you can still get good images. There's always going to be something better, something with better low light performance, something with more dynamic range. But there's photos from cameras 15, 20 years old that have won competitions and no one ever said there's not enough dynamic range in there, or there's not enough bits or megabytes or whatever. So don't be obsessed with having the absolute best. There's always going to be something better. Cameras from 10 years ago are still doing a really good job.